The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is Andre Mayette, your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again to another fun-filled show. Today I talk with Barbara Randall Kesel, who is an editor for DC Comics, went on to do some freelance work, working for Dark Horse, and some writing as well to start off her career. Very interesting way of how she got into comics, and we get into all that, talk about her work within the industry and trying to make some change from within, and have a nice chat. It's funny because we do talk towards the end a bit about some problematic attitudes that some fans, in quotes, of comics have towards women representation in movies and film, and women creators, and she's a lot kinder than I expected her to be, which actually was nice. It was, you know, in our very divisive world we live in with politics and everything else, and everyone getting really upset, I do feel as though it's sort of turning inward and not having empathy for the other side, not trying to understand where they're coming from, just shutting them out, as dismissing them as, you know, their opinions not being valid in any way, and it doesn't help. It really doesn't help. And Barbara talks about that divisiveness and how to approach it in a way that, I mean, obviously it's a way that most people don't. I wish more people did. And hearing her talk about it really opened up my mind into not being quite as dismissive when it comes to encountering folks with differing opinions. I know it's easy when it's wildly against what you believe in to hear someone say something and get defensive about it. But sometimes a little kindness can go a long way. And Barbara really opened my mind to that, which was a great conversation. Great chat. Barbara was excellent, and so happy for her to give her time and be on the show. So thanks, Barbara, if you're tuning in. Much appreciated. And if you were listening, we're chugging along our journey here into Season 6. Last conversation with Dan McDade went awesome. Got a few more in the pipeline coming down the ropes. But if you are tuning in, you do like what I do here at the Graphic Histories Podcast, be sure to check out our sister podcast, X-Rated, the X-Men Animated Review Show, in which me and co-host Davin talk about all things X-Men cartoon. Initially, it started off with the X-Men, original X-Men Fox cartoon, and then went on to the X-Men 97, and now we went through the movies, the live-action movies, and now we are into the X-Men Evolution TV series. Now we're hitting Season 2. Fun chat. We have a lot of guests. We usually have people that work on the show on sometimes. We have fans of the show come on sometimes. And yeah, we just have a great conversation all around. So if you're into nostalgia podcasts, go check all that out. And as I mentioned last week, I've been watching the Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show on Disney+. Still loving it. It's great. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and a lot of great characters showing up, and a lot of cool designs. And the soundtrack, I've noticed recently, is very cool. I really dig it, and I wish there was... I assume when the show's done, we'll get an official soundtrack release. I think you can only get the new theme song on there now. But check that out. It's excellent. I really like what they did with it. Kind of modernized the original Spider-Man song from the original 60s cartoon. I do miss that jazzy 60s score. You hear that snap, that jazz. But it was really fun show. Check that out. And check out this conversation that I have with Barbara Randall Kesel, editor for DC Comics. Gone on to do some other really amazing work in comics. Cool projects down the pipeline we'll find out about soon. But here it is, my chat with Barbara Randall Kesel.
Good. I'm on my 4th hour chats today, so my voice is getting a little raw, just to let you know.
Oh, well, that's okay. What, lots of meetings? Is that what you're up to today, or lots of other interviews?
Yeah, my work life is half Zoom chats and half typing documents.
Oh, so riveting. That's where are you calling in from?
This is my home office in you're a strange little corner next to the door because I've been moving things around. So I basically have stuff shoved over to half of it while I
Hmm.
reassemble the other side of it. So it's a little bit of a crazy mess in progress.
Ah,
So you have the back side of my door and a shelf full of the things I've crammed in there to go through later.
hmm.
So
Well, hey, look, I wouldn't trust an artist that doesn't
mine
have
is not
some.
as interesting as yours. Those
Oh,
sides are pretty good, but you can't see that today.
yeah, I wouldn't trust an artist that doesn't have a little bit of clutter sometime in their life. That's just generally
Hmm.
comes with the territory,
Hmm.
I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've tried to do this lovely Zoom background so I can be in some kind of exotic location or something, but I have fluffy, flossy hair.
yeah.
So you get that constant, change and static around the edges, which is more distracting than the lack of stuff back here.
Yeah, I
So,
never, I
all right,
mean,
how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Yeah, I don't trust people. It's not like I don't trust, but whenever I talk to someone that has some kind of a thing, it's like your background can't be that bad. Like I don't imagine it's like a hellscape behind you that you can't show the world or whatever. No, I'm good, good. It's an unusually warm day today for the middle of winter. So yeah, it was nice. I'm in
Where are you based?
Nova Scotia, Canada.
Well, that's about as far as you can get from here. I'm in Southern California.
Ah, okay, yeah, yeah, pretty fair. How are
Normally warm, currently raining,
Yeah. Oh, that's good. You guys could use some rain.
and not on fire.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, as someone I talked to someone recently that also lives out that way, and it's like, as someone that just sort of consumes media, as I do, or the general person does, a lot of the people producing it, are in California. So it's like this bevy of like information from people that are there living through it at the moment, or have friends that lost homes or had to evacuate and run off, and it's got to be a bit of a nightmare. I'm sorry that you guys are going through that.
It's more than a bit of a nightmare. I think Southern California's been changed dramatically, and people don't really understand how yet. So
Hmm.
we'll see, in the months to come, because
Yeah.
we're just in that pause where a disaster has happened. Everybody has had the moment of shock that it's kind of over for now, and now we'll see what happens with everybody's rehousing, rebuilding process. But I think a lot of people are going to be lost from here. That
Yeah.
they're just not going to be able to afford where they were, or not be able to afford to rebuild, and that's just awful.
Mm. Yeah.
So, but
Was
but thankfully we are in an area that's. I just got some fire ash in the yard, and we'll have nice flowers next spring. So I'm not affected personally, but heartbroken for the people who have been, several of whom I know.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a real tragedy for sure. And yeah, it's tough, the way the world is shifting. And it's not all for the good. And unfortunately, stuff like this is just gonna remind you to take stock and sort of appreciate what you got, because you never know how quickly you can lose it.
And keep your go bag prepared. So
Well, thankfully, we don't have that issue too badly out here. There was a wildfire last year near Halifax, which is the capital of the province, and about an hour from where I am, and it took out some big areas, and it was rough going for a little while, but not on a level that you guys had, obviously. Um, but it's scary, Just Mother Nature, when it claps back at you, can certainly pack a punch, and it's nothing makes you feel more insignificant than when you see the total destruction like wrought by something like that, and how quickly it can sort of devastate entire areas of people. So you know, put you in
cool.
perspective. Yeah.
All
So
right.
yeah, you're from New York originally? Is that correct? My research is
No,
right?
no. I was
No.
born outside of Seattle. I'm
Oh,
from
okay.
America, as they say,
Yes.
because I was born outside of Seattle. We moved to Boston. We moved to Houston. We moved to Texas. I moved to New York. I moved to Portland. I moved to Tampa. And now back to California.
Oh,
And I have
wow.
relatives in North Dakota and Ohio. So I grew up road tripping. So I
Ah.
say I'm from America.
Was it like your parents'
I
job that
can't.
had you
I can't
for?
really claim any of the corners.
Well, that's great. I mean, the wide perspective. Did your dad have like a job, or your mom, that caused you to move around a
My
lot, or?
dad was a mechanical engineer specializing in compressed air systems. He
Oh,
started
wow.
at Boeing with
Oh,
jet engines, GE with bigger jet engines, down to Texas for Dresser with power recovery systems, and he worked for a private engineering company in California. And then comics took me everywhere else.
well, when did you
So
just like with the moving, was comics a standard? Like, when did you discover comics?
I discovered them. I discovered that I'm trying to think of the first one I had was a coverless copy of Aquaman #7. So when I went to my first comic convention, the first thing I looked for in the dealer's room was a copy of Aquaman #7 with a cover.
Mm.
So it was one of those infamous, a used bookstore in Texas that carried the I don't know what my very first comic was because I know I was familiar with the form before Texas, but in Texas we had a used bookstore that had a lot of coverless comics and other comics, and I picked up most of my comics from there or from trading with friends. And I would find them on road trips in like the 7-Eleven or Stuckey's or the local equivalent with the comic book rounder. But I never lived anywhere where I could go to a comic book store and pick up new comics regularly until I lived in California again and got them from Pfeiffer's Books Antiques in Pomona, California.
Wow.
And that's a whole separate story how I ended up in that store.
Well, I mean, we got some time if you want to share it, but it's yeah, there's something really awe-inspiring as a kid when you see that the new comics, like similar to me. I came across mine in used bookstores and had that cherished pile of coverless comic books that every kid did, and then eventually sort of you find that comic store and you see, oh man, this is like it opens a whole new world to you. It's not just whatever you can kind of scraps you can find. You're at the front line now. So
right.
that's a
No, mine was during college, I worked at the library in Pomona and I was early for a shift. And the story I didn't tell for years was that I was walking down a section of 2nd Street in Pomona that had been set aside as a pedestrian mall. So this road was closed off. So I was walking down the middle of it and I had a guy come up behind me, throw his arm around my shoulders. And we're standing hip to hip. And he said, "This is so great. I've been looking for this for so long. Looking forward to this for so long. My car's over there. We're going to go up to the mountains. It's going to be so awesome. I've been looking forward to this." And I remember thinking, he's crazy and I'm in danger. And I threw myself off him and ended up in the comic book store with
wow.
Ma and Pa Kent behind a counter in the middle with all the new comics. And I said, "I'm not here. You don't see me," and disappeared into the stacks of all these shelves of used books. It was wonderful. It was heaven. And then the guy came running in behind me and he said, "Have you seen my girlfriend?" And they said, "Yeah, she went out the other door into the parking lot." Because those old, like Woolworth style buildings with the recessed entry had one entrance on the street and another into the parking lot in the back.
Yeah.
So they went and locked the door behind him and asked me if I wanted to call the cops. But this was 1979 when I thought I was pre-law. And I said, "No, all that will happen is an incident report with my name and address on it will be generated. And he might be able to get a hold of that," because I didn't look at him. I made sure I didn't look at him because I would freeze. I can tell what he sounded like. I can tell what he felt like, but I can't describe him. And none of his words were the sort of threat that anyone would have taken seriously in 1979. Nowadays, they know how many people were working, were grabbing girls on the go.
Yeah.
But at the time, it wouldn't have done anything. But I said, "No, but can I have every one of those comic books behind you, please?" And that became my go-to place for new comics for years until I would start complaining about how stupid the girls were. And Francis Pfeiffer said, "You can write letters to them, you know." And I went, "Oh," it's like the skies had opened and a light bulb went off. I can write letters too because I'm getting these in real time, not years out of sync.
Right.
So I wrote a few letters. I wrote one that was 10 pages long that was a response to an editorial comment from Dick Giordano, where he basically said, a letter writer had written in and said, "Dear Dick, how come your male characters are so well-rounded, but your female characters feel like stereotypes? Maybe you should hire some women writers and artists." And Dick's editorial reply, or that written by his assistant, said, "I don't think that's it. What do you think?" And I was like, "Dear Mr. Giordano, yeah, I am a theater major. Here's how 10,000 actors can play Hamlet and have it be a unique experience each time. Part of the artist goes into the art. Yes, perhaps your writers and artists should meet and talk to some women and perhaps observe them and fold this information in because you're embarrassing me." And blah, blah, blah. Went on like that. What I found out 25 years later is Jeanette had walked into Dick's office and said, "Dick, there's only one woman in editorial and that will change by the end of the month." He opens the mail and there's this diatribe from me going over how to set up a character, how to talk to somebody about putting together something in story, how to not embarrass the girls, how to do all this. So one-stop shopping, he decided he'd found his new editor.
Wow.
So I got this phone call in 1981. "How far is Diamond Bar from San Diego? And can you come to this convention and meet me?" So in
That's
1981,
awesome.
the infamous last year at the El Cortez for the San Diego convention, I ran around. I spent the day with Dick Giordano, and he offered me a job that I didn't want to take at the time because I was finishing my degree. So I got the next opening after I was done.
Wow.
So,
Was that the law
meanwhile,
degree, the pre-law degree? Were you still in that, or was that something else?
no, I was a theater major, but
Oh,
decided what
right.
I wanted to do in life. There
Ah,
were some things that had gone on in high school that left me not wanting to go far from home and not wanting to make decisions. And I kind of defaulted to that because I had a really great theater program and a really great theater teacher in high school who integrated all of theater and was very fond of saying there's no stars without the rest of the people. All of you are working together to bring this performance to life. And I describe us as Glee with no budget. We were, recycled thrift shop costumes and cardboard sets because we were in the years after all the budgets were gone.
mhm.
Uh, but really dynamic. And I just kind of couldn't decide what else to do and wanted to stick close to home for reasons that have to do with my family.
Mm.
And so it was 7 miles. Cal Poly was 7 miles up the road. They had a good theater tech program. And I thought, oh, I'll end up doing costuming or something. What I discovered with costuming, I could take a machine outside in Southern California and deal with the fact that I'm allergic to wool, which is
Oh,
what a significant amount of theatrical costumes at the time were made of,
mm.
and realized to do this professionally, I'd have to be in a small costuming room in New York or something and not be able to go outside. So I had a problem. So when the comics thing came along, it's kind of like it solved my problem of not knowing what I was going to be doing,
Wow.
and went from there.
Well, like, was it your experience with theater that like kind of informed you with the craft of storytelling when you're outlining, the different ways that story can be changed or altered, or when you sent that letter to
Doing a
Dick?
lot of scene analysis, directorial
Mm,
analysis, character analysis, talking to other people, watching actors work through things. I'd been an actor in high school.
mm,
By the time I got to college, I couldn't do that in work, so I let that go. I also looked at the facts as 5'4", thick-legged, um, alto not soprano, crazy hair, psoriasis, weird teeth, and I said, I don't have a future on stage.
mhm.
So what am I going to be doing? So I was focusing on costuming and theater management. And then when I realized costuming was not really going to work out, kind of unenthusiastically leaning towards the management,
Yeah,
but just kind of, I mean, because the comics thing came along my junior year of a
yeah.
5-year program where year 5 is essentially your senior project. And I was kind of doing the I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do thing. And that came along, and I thought, this is great because I can help expand the role of women in comics.
Mm.
I can help do the kind of comics that wouldn't embarrass me or wouldn't bore me,
Well, did you find
which
yourself as an
kind of
outlier,
happened.
like at that time period? Because one thing I had this conversation with someone on here recently, like
Yes.
about like the Big Bang Theory and those sort of shows, and like how I don't really like that show because like a woman goes in a comic shop, and the joke is that all the nerds are shocked that a woman has walked into a comic shop. So like at a time period in the 70s when you were in fact the woman walking into a comic shop, was that the experience you were having?
The comic shop didn't happen until 79. So I was
Hmm.
sort of at the tail end of that era when things were starting to evolve a little bit. The particular store I tripped on was just a really nice place that had old and new comics, old and new books, or old books, antiques, other paraphernalia, but a nice crowd of people that hung out there. I'd also in college fallen into a group of gamers because my first boyfriend in high school was one of a set of guys who played D&D off the original books,
Nice.
and I would mock them fiercely because I said, you're playing this game based on math and greed. It's all about, get the gold, get the this, and all. This
Hmm.
is a stupid game. This is just war games applied to Tolkien,
Hmm.
no interest. I literally ran into him in college, and he said, Barbie, you've got to check out this game we're playing now. So you'd approve. It's called Champions. It's all about being a superhero and staying in character, and so
Did you end up
he
playing it?
dragged me over to that crowd to look at
Nice.
their gaming stuff. And I ended up connected to a bigger club of gamers, which was, as I understood it, there was a gaming club at Cal State Fullerton that consisted of one student and a bunch of his friends, where we had a floor on the humanities building from noon to midnight every Saturday. But I don't think there was ever more than one student involved. But it was great because number of groups of people, this club, shall we say, was an amalgamation of game playing groups from 2 different stores and Marines who played D&D in Okinawa. So I kind of came into a lot of these campaigns late. So sometimes I'd be included and sometimes I'd just be observing, but it gave me a really great, coming at from like theatrical director point of view, I'm watching all these groups and watching what they're getting out of it and how they're playing and what the experience is like for them and kind of absorbing all that information. So then when I ended up going off to DC, we ended up being approached by TSR to do some comics. So I was assigned to do the development work on those because I said, yeah, I kind of speak both languages. I know what the comics fan wants. Our initial concept is that we would do 4-issue comics miniseries that would be recollected into one book that would be sold in gaming stores as like a game module.
Oh, okay.
So that the information, there were stories based on whatever kind of existing campaigns or rules, but also new characters and new maps. So there was additional story and character information for the gamers. And there was a comic story with this new information for the comics fans. And there was a bit of I ended up leaving New York, but there was a bit of a falling out between the two sides, and the whole project never really, the game shop side never really came together. But there were still some really cool things that we put together.
Well, I remember those
It was
TSR comics, like some of them.
You do or don't?
I do, yeah. But I feel like it was like, what year would that have been when those were coming out?
Oh, let's see. That would have been 86, 87, 88, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that probably makes sense. I probably got reprints, but when I was a younger kid, I really got into Dragonlance, and I remember seeing a lot of those TSR theme comics coming out, and I was super excited because reading all the books, it's like extra story and that sort of thing. So that's really neat. And there's a lot of overlap with
doing things along the line of the novels, so that it was familiar to that audience too. So that was a great project. That was one of the oddball ones I worked on.
Well, when you
got the.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, when you got to DC, what was the first project you worked on after you were hired?
Well, it came in as Marv's associate editor, so I was immediately working on both of the Titans series because it switched to the Baxter and the regular format at the same time. God, I'm trying to remember what my initial lineup of what I worked on. So basically, I worked on everything that was a Marv book. But over the next few years, I sort of became the utility infield editor for all the out-of-house editors and various other things that went on. I developed that TSR stuff on my own. I ended up accidentally launching Kelly Jones on Deadman because I'd been assigned Action Comics Weekly, the Deadman series. And Dan Jurgens had gone off to work on Nightwing, I think. And I think I called every living human working in the industry to see if I could get anybody to work on Deadman. And the answer that came back each time was, I don't want to do a weekly comic, or Neil Adams. I'm not going into Neil Adams territory. And Marv had been talking about Kelly Jones about working on a Titans West comic. I'd been telling Marv I thought Kelly was wrong for a superhero comic. But then I thought, hey, we haven't started that yet. Kelly, do you want to work on Deadman? And I said, and he calls me up a little while later and goes, I've been playing around with some sketching. Is it okay if he looks dead? I said, I don't care. Pencils on paper that Pablo Marcos can ink, whatever. I just need to get these pages in the door because the deadlines on that book were just awful. Then when the pages came in, I was like bouncing up and down the hallways, making everybody in the company look at them. Look at this. This is so cool. Because again, my part of theater was the era where there were dramatic or stylized reinterpretations of classic works. So I wanted to see a lot of the artists sort of stretch and reconnect with the material in a different way, or do something that was slightly off the norm. So I'd gotten a lot of young artists kind of started on things, including Rob on Hawk and Dove. He actually did his bonus book first, but we talked to him very quickly about working on that book. Really? But I wanted to see things stretch a little bit. So Deadman was like a perfect example. And then Burning ran with doing a little prestige version mini based on Deadman alone after that. And then Kelly seems to have done pretty well after that.
Yeah.
Because he was on the verge of leaving comics because his original style was kind of too reality based for what was going on at the time. And once he got into this sort of pseudo-Gothic stylization, he really kind of took off.
Yeah, it's amazing when they find the stride like that. Like he certainly did.
It's so nice when you see somebody kick into kind of what they're meant to be. And And I've always been good at seeing what the weak parts are in somebody's art and kind of encourage them to lean on the parts where they shine. So it's been nice. My very first comic story, though, was funny. It's Dick hired me to do a Batgirl backup. No, okay.
Yeah.
I hated Batgirl.
Okay.
I hated Batgirl.
Was she in that
name's
initial
Barbara.
10? Oh, right, of course. Yeah.
My name is Barbara. My father's name is James. When I was in second grade, and I think Batman was always already running in reruns because I'm a little younger than it. I had two boys in second grade who were the Joker and the Penguin, they had decided. And so they wait for me every morning to capture me or fight me because I was Batgirl, because my name was Barbara. My father's name was James. God only knows how everybody found out this information, whatever. But it led to a few weeks of terror where I'd go to school so frightened and learn to fight like a demon. So when I was asked to write Batgirl, it's kind of like, okay, thanks. Anything but, please. But what I got told by Dick is, we want you to write this Batgirl backup. I want to introduce you as a writer to this field. But write like Carrie Burkett, because the male readers are uncomfortable with the idea of girls stepping into this world. So we would just kind of want to ease them into it without frightening them. I write a story that is based, it's like mathematical analysis of 25 Carrie Burkett Batgirl backups. And its pacing, its shape, everything there is done the way he does it, and with a little bit of my own voice added in. And then I went through and created this sort of Xerox patchwork of panels that I thought Jose Delbo drew really well. So I was leaning on images where I thought he did things really well and stayed away from ones where I thought he was not as dynamic. Okay. I pick up a copy off the shelf at the store, and Trevor Von Eden has done it. So I'm there in the store going, this was not a Trevor Von Eden script. I could have written a Trevor Von Eden script. It's like, why did no one tell me? I mean, these days people are better about communication at the beginning. But I just remember my heart breaking going, I love Trevor's work on Thriller. I could have played up that in so many different ways and didn't get the chance. But then, so I was supposed to do a Batgirl backup long term. I had written 4 2-part scripts. And then Dick got promoted to managing editor. Len came in, didn't know me, wanted nothing to do with Batgirl. He wanted Catwoman instead. So my initial writing career is a 1 story in 2 parts and 2 episodes. But I was still in school, so I wasn't worried about it. And then the joke became, I couldn't be in a New Talent Showcase because I'd already been published.
No.
But Sal had me editing some of the work in New Talent Showcase for the writers there. So I was in this weird sort of editorial limbo again before I started. And then when I started, I came in as Marv's associate editor and kind of worked on all the books that he did. But there was a lot of conferring on a lot of things in our office, because the office was, oh gosh, when I came in, I think it was Alan Gold, Bob Greenberger, and me, but we had the couch where all the freelancers hung out. So a lot of people hanging out, talking about comics in various ways and getting in the way at times. So,
well, it's funny.
I said one of my great moments was I used to have to shoo Luke Skywalker off my desk because I'd go out to lunch and come back and there'd be this person using my desk, which was the first one in the door in that room. And, little Star Wars fan me was both terrified and delighted to say, can I have my desk back? I need to work.
Really? If he was just hanging out
there
around
in town. I was there in town because of the comic store he was part owner of, I believe.
Oh, right.
I think the time overlaps there, but it was kind of that silly thrill of, fantasy is interacting with reality here. It's odd.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about working with, because I talk to quite a few folks, and I don't often hear writers talk about tailoring what they're writing specifically for certain artists. So that's really kind of cool to hear. I mean, obviously that's like a deeper level than
I always like to, if I know who's going to be drawing it, because you want to pitch their strike zone. If you're doing a script, I'm not as much the person who wants to talk everything out with the artist. I don't tend to build things up talking. I tend to build things out writing, but I definitely want to, the style we had at CrossGen, I thought was really nice. I did what I called a plotalogue, which was all the plot points with dialogue thrown in. But sometimes the dialogue would be, my face is very angry because I'm yelling at you as though I want to kill you, and exact dialogue to be inserted later. So that you get, because I'd found that oftentimes in plot style, you don't get good expressions and interactions because You have an artist who's looking at the mechanics and the beauty of the action involved, but not anything having to do with the interactions. So I like the kind of halfway format.
Oh, that's very cool. When you got to DC and you know, in the editorial kind of station, and you know, your goal with that letter campaign was to change how women were depicted. How easy was it to start easing the industry into making those changes and making better representation of women in comics?
Well, it wasn't just about that. I mean, it was about telling good stories and being true to whatever the thing was.
Mm.
But I did oftentimes talk with a lot of the writers, especially, and say, all right, you've written your script. Because I noticed a default. The male writer tends to identify with the male lead character, and so everyone else is an accessory. And I'd say, would you do me a favor? Would you go back through your script and imagine that you're an actor who's been cast in each of these roles? Because if that person has one line, that person can have one line and have a specific point of personality or some specific gimmick about them that adds to the reality of all your story and adds to the weight of them. So make sure they're not standing around, because especially what I noticed happening is the women characters stand around in the background because the guy writer is thinking in terms of the guy character. So these characters stand around and do nothing unless there's some kind of spotlight panel on them. And I'm thinking, all right, treat each one as the role you have. Show them thinking too. Like, are they just standing and waiting for orders, or are they doing something else? What's their specific reality in relation to all this? Because the person I know who did an extraordinary amount of acting with his characters is George Perez. And yes, he'd funnel 75% more story into every panel than anybody else could.
Yeah.
But he still did things that in theater business, in theater world, are called bits of character business, where your character's not drawing a significant amount of attention to themselves, but they're doing something that has to do with their context in that scene at that time. Because not everybody is paying attention to the lead character at all times in a story. They've got their own stuff going on. So, you know, what can your characters be doing that adds to the reality of this space, that may make someone laugh or smile when they notice it in the background, that adds to the delight of the overall. And, you know, every time I talk to people and say, you know, just please stop drawing just yourself. Please stop writing just yourself. Not that I put it in that way, but it wasn't like it was belligerent jerks. It was people of really goodwill who had never had a situation that challenged them to do that and look at things that way. And in just about all the cases, they'd find something more in what they were working on, which was great.
Yeah. Well, they probably grew up in a
I
world
also
that...
just worked with a lot of people who were looking to do good stuff. I mean, because it was a time where people were looking for more opportunities.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, like
because we fall into habits of what involves what's in our own world, and you forget to sometimes to think in terms, put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Well, you think about the guys that were making those books, like, you know, they grew up reading the books that came before them that had no, you know, even less representation probably, or as far as like good characters or stories or anything to do with those characters. So it's, you know, it's very easy to fall into a vicious circle when you just sort of, you know, kind of following what came before you and not thinking about, you know, the options and extending the narrative in different ways. I do theater as well. I have for quite a while too. So I love the comparisons and that you bring such a theatrical outlook to comics. That's fantastic.
The other part of what I'd say I bring on along that line is the Shakespearean structure of saying, okay, you got a story. It's about one person, but what is of interest to the groundlings? What is of interest to the people in the seats? And what is of interest to the royals? You know, the idea that some of the material is very highfalutin, subtle, political. Some of it is like bawdy, punny, gossipy, and some of it is just slapstick. And if you can include some of all of that, we all like those different things at different times in our lives or in different times of our day or in different genres. If you can include material from all those areas, even though a story may strongly lean on one, you know, you can have a crazy ass fighting manga that has an underlay of a strong philosophical argument. So then that lingers. that kind of permeates and lingers to somebody who then wants to come back to the material. You can have stuff that's just sitcom level fun, but then you notice it's got like a certain amount of social commentary, or it just has that you've never noticed, the funny stuff with the mouse on the floor, or little things that are visual interest and just extra stuff in there until you go back and look at it. But if you can embed material that speaks to every audience, then you get people coming back as opposed to just reading it once.
Yeah.
So I like to do that always.
That's awesome. Yeah, no,
I'm not sure it's always successful, but it's my goal.
Well, hey, I mean, I always say when it comes to comics, like if I see anything different, it's just I like it like instantly, even if it's not necessarily something that I immediately gravitate towards. It's different. I haven't seen it before, So when people are bringing different perspectives and providing something that kind of brings all of that, whether it be with the art or with the writing, it always sort of opens up new avenues, and in my brain, it makes me way happier about reading comics. So that's cool.
It depends on what the expectation is of the reader too. If they want the same thing to be the same thing each time, then they're going to be sad and frustrated when it's suddenly told from somebody else's point of view, or if it's told in a different style or things like that. So you're always going to have a certain amount of dissatisfaction with some part of your audience, depending on their expectation for what they want out of the experience. To which I say often to that audience, what you have, reread what you have already.
Yeah.
Because you already know how it's going, because you're not the same person who read it the first time.
No.
But it's always going to have that cozy association for you, making, that it's going to deliver what you like.
Yeah.
And then maybe come at something new and say, okay, this time I'm prepared. I know it's not my flavor, but what is this flavor like?
Well, just being openly. That's one of my biggest complaints of
Mhm.
modern nerddom, or a lot of it is the toxic side of it, I guess. And I'm sure like it was now it's also instant with the internet. Back then you would have to read the letters or the letters pages of the books that you're working on to get what the fans are saying about the projects. But now it's so instantaneous in a way that it's like everyone sort of builds up this perfect story in their head about what they want their fiction to be. They're like, it'd be so great if this guy turned to be this guy's dad, or that guy, was this thing, or that guy turned to be the bad guy. And then when they see the thing, the comic, the movie, the book, and it's not what they imagined, they immediately hate it because it's not the perfect narrative structured for them. They already built in their head. So,
Well, we all want that dopamine hit of the cookie. We know we like the cookie. We expect the cookie. We want the cookie. When we don't get the cookie, when we think we're getting a cookie and we don't get the cookie, you have that first anguish. And then ideally you can get over that and come back and go, okay, I guess this is okay. Or maybe I can recreate the first version. But I think that speaks to so many people being so anxiously out of sorts these days, because the rules for the world are changing dramatically. So there's people who want to clamp on and say, I want it to be exactly like I remember it being, which usually isn't how it was, but it's like, it's like, I want to return to the same feeling I had before and not have anything startle, frighten, or challenge me. And that's kind of fair. I mean, we all want the cozy blanket days as opposed to the sharp spikes and walking across blazing rocks days. But there's not a lot of people are more isolated, and they don't have those big packs of friend groups to absorb their weird days in a way that we did before. And I think they're really hurting for it because they want an absolute consistency of personality, which none of us have. But they also want absolute consistency of experience, which grows stale.
Yeah. Well, they're the first that will complain it's exactly the same. Like they're like, this is too much like it was before. But then if you do it different, well, this is too different. And so you got to straddle some line to make it innovative and new, but also give that cozy feeling that you speak of. That's a really nice way to frame it. And it's also like
we all need hugs. We all need hugs, and we need to be reassured that we have a valid place in the universe. And I think sometimes that's what people are groping for, is make the world make sense to me.
Like it did when I was a kid.
Exactly what I had before. When I knew things made sense.
I saw a comedian really sum it up really well. I think it was Brian Posehn. He said something along the lines of, he was like, complaining about Star Wars or something, and he said like Star Wars should be the way it was when I was a kid, and everything was better, and mom and dad were still together, and like he was just going through all the things that was going on in his own life. That was when life was happiest for him. That the fictions need to mirror what it was then, and it's like just sliding in your own life experiences or when you found those things. And anytime I read someone say this ruined my childhood or this ruined this thing, I immediately am like dismiss all of their opinions further on, because it's like the thing you had that you loved is still there. Go read it. Don't ruin it for someone else.
Well, and you also just need to go and say to people sometimes you're going to be okay.
Yeah,
It's going to be okay.
it's a very lovely
Okay,
human
let's
way
look
to
at it
do
again.
Yeah. Well, so you eventually moved on to Dark Horse, is that right? To become an editor there?
I was living in New York, and I have to tell you, I hated New York with a passion.
Mm.
I am a West Coast girl,
Mhm.
and it's just, especially in New York in the 80s and late 80s was not my thing.
Mhm.
And I met and married Carl, and we had honeymoon in the Pacific Northwest. And I got to tell you, when I got off the plane at SeaTac, my body says home up there.
Nice.
Yeah, in that environment. So it was significantly cheaper at the time. We had friends around Linda Randall who lived out there, and so we kind of decided to take a jump because I wanted to. I got glass ceilinged pretty hard at DC, and it became clear that no matter how hard I worked and how much I did, I wasn't going to be rising up anytime soon. And I was making them a good amount of money. So I also wanted to be out of New York, and so I agreed to make the jump, and we freelanced for a while. And then Carl was locked into two big projects that didn't deliver, the Teen Titans games and then The World's Finest from Steve Rude. So he's locked into those projects. The pages weren't coming in. We were starting to have trouble there. I was not gaining any ground as a freelancer. And so Dark Horse came calling, and I decided A, we needed health insurance, and B, I needed steady employment. So I took a job there. I always say I was at Dark Horse during its awkward teenage years. I was not in sync with a lot of the culture of the guys there, but I brought a lot of freelancers with me who did some good work there. Took over, Star Wars Dark Empire came to us.
Oh, yeah.
Hellboy came to us. Started working on projects with Kelly Jones, who did an Aliens for me and then did his own creator-owned work there. So we did some good projects, but it was not a comfortable fit for me.
No.
And then it became more uncomfortable to the point where I came home talking to Carl about how I was going to deal with things, and he said, "Why don't you quit?" And that had not occurred to me as an option. So I went freelance once again, and then I'm in actor terms, I have audition fear, but not stage fright. Comics switched to this pitch model that I have a hell of a lot of time with for two reasons. As an editor, I always gave people an area to focus, give me something with this or something with that or something with that. And I'd have people say, "Give us a pitch." And you go, "Well, what are you doing?" "Oh, I can't tell you." So I'm just supposed to guess what you're doing and invest all my time into doing for free a whole bunch of fake ideas that you might choose to use. So it became a really inefficient use of my time. And just as I was going, well, okay, I wasn't really finding the field very welcoming. Carl, I believe, preferred when I was out of the house to when I was a fellow freelancer in it. And, as all these things went around, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to get a different kind of job. What's it going to be? And I kind of applied for some different jobs around town and wasn't making any traction there. And then the crazy millionaire from Florida, I went down to the San Diego convention in the year 2000. And for the first 2 days, I started hearing multiple people came up to me saying, "Mark Alessi's looking for you." And I'd say, "Thank you. Who the hell is Mark Alessi?" And finally, on the third day, I ran into his people. And then on Sunday, we had a long talk. And I realized that, this guy was serious about wanting me to work there, because his feeling was he was trying to do evergreen that I didn't know what the word cross generation stood for at the time. I was kind of worried that they were going to turn out to be some sort of Bible comics thing. But
does kind of sound like that when you first hear it. A little bit.
He wanted to do stuff that was all ages friendly, that was evergreen work, and that crossed the generations, the kind of stories people had liked to read. But he had targeted me and someone else. Actually, I don't know who the someone else was. where between the TSR books and Star Wars and everything else, he had identified me as one of two people who had brought science fiction and fantasy into the comics world on projects that actually made a profit. So, he wanted me to set up this team of writers. And so I went home and talked to Carl about it for a bit. And then I decided to check it out. And we both flew out there as I got interviewed. And part of the interview is funny because Alessi takes Mark aside and he goes, look at, I want to hire her, but you can't get her pregnant. I don't want this to be a situation where I got a girl on staff and then suddenly she's pregnant on me. So we'd incurred some debt. And I said, all right, let's do this for 2 years. Let's go out to California. Let's have somebody else, plop somebody else into our house for the time being, rent a place there. In 2 years, we'll either have made this company succeed or fail. And at that point I can say, hello, I need to keep working as a freelancer. I need to go back home. Well, during those 2 years, it kind of coincided with, in my opinion, Carl's midlife crisis that translated into everything in my life is wrong because of Barbara. If I dump her, it's all going to be good. Okay, whatever. So we split up. So I'm suddenly stuck in Florida going, oh, I work for this company and I live here now. What the hell? Bought a house, settled in a place, CrossGen went under, and I kind of sat out there thinking, okay, comics has evolved to a place I don't like. I found it very, at that point in the late 2000s, I found it very trashy and slutty across the board. And I thought, this is just not a world I enjoy playing with. I feel like it's retrograde in terms of the girls are more powerful, but they're all like, hello, here's my tits,
Yeah, I jokingly talk about that period when they like gave the Sue Storm the four with the four gone, so you could see her cleavage in it, and like in all these costumes along the lines that were just ridiculous. Like Black Cat wore a costume that was barely held together with like hope, and it was an insane area.
My problem was never just the visuals; it's that they were usually stupid or had nothing to do in the story. They were kind of one note, that there was not much character or personality there. But I just thought I wasn't ever really interested in manga. And I'm looking at all this going, there's no place for me in this field right now. And I don't know anybody working in it anymore. I've kind of, drifted out. A lot of us at CrossGen sort of got slimed because of the association with the company. And so at that time, then my dad got lung cancer and died. And then 2008 happened and all these things where I thought, all right. So basically after several long talks with my mom to figure out where she was going to move or I was going to move or what was going to go on, I moved back out here to California and said, all right, okay, I'm coming back as a freelancer. So clear 2 rooms because I can't afford to live there on my own. And then I came out here as a freelancer, I'd always tried to have a part-time job to make sure there was some kind of consistent income coming in with all the vagaries of companies that like to forget to pay you or have decided that now 90-day net is a good thing for them. So I came out here and then could not find a job because we were talking 17% unemployment in my area. I wasn't bilingual Mandarin or Spanish, so I was not making any headway getting on part-time work. So I sort of, patched together what I could and tried to figure out what I was going to do next and interviewed a lot of people where I grabbed a lot of people I knew in life and I said, all right, here's my background. What is the job I should be doing that I don't know exists that you see me in, help me figure out what the hell I could do that actually will make a living anymore. Because economy had also, I moved out here in 2009. So the economy was also like, we're dying. And then I met Kevin New and he was wanting to start up a new digital comics company. It's a tech startup with a comics component to show off the technology. And that's as much as I can say about the job I have now. But I'm working there at that, and we are to the point where it's become something real as opposed to something theoretical, which is very, very cool.
Oh, cool!
And more on that in the future.
Oh, good. Well, that's very cool. I look forward to checking.
We had offices for a short time, then COVID happened, and we all went home and we're kind of spread out, and it's just sort of stayed that way for now.
I feel like a lot of people sort of fell into that vibe. It's like, well, I don't understand why. Like they had a big thing here where like a lot of people obviously moved out where I work from home. People kind of spread across the country because people with government jobs that could work remotely would move to like a place like our province, which is certainly costs a lot less to live in than Ottawa or any of the big ones, or Ontario or Toronto. And then all of a sudden they just sort of like decided everyone's got to go back. And it's like, why? Like, why put all the money into offices and everything when you're all doing the same job at home? Everybody's happier, you'd think. But it's a weird sort of antiquated system that means you have to sit in an office in order to be productive. I don't know. Sort of drives me nuts.
Well, there's two things. They've got to justify the rent and insurance on their building by having bodies in it. Otherwise, why are they keeping the building? But number two, there's still this sort of 1930s streamlining concept that if you're not watching people, they're not working.
Yeah.
And a lot of creative or a lot of administrative work, well, not so much administrative, there's a lot of work that isn't time-based, that time doesn't necessarily make it better or worse, but the dedication to do X amount of progress on it does.
Yeah.
So it just means that the middle management people haven't caught up with the reality of how work happens or what the value of work should be. And then a lot of squawking about, oh, it's unfair if somebody with a job price in this neighborhood moves to that neighborhood that's cheaper. It's unfair to the people who live locally and come to the office. So could be true. All of it. I mean, all of it is justifiable. It's a justifiable point of view. It's just not necessarily the modern world.
No, certainly not. And you did a bit of work for IDW. Is that correct as well, as a writer?
I did as a freelance writer. I did a little bit of work for like everybody with a lot of things that, boy, IDW is one where I kept having 5-issue miniseries that got changed to 4 halfway through, which means you've already done 1, 2, and part of 3, and you have to scramble to cram everything into the bucket. And I wish I'd just gone into the second or third one saying, why don't we just make this 4? At Tokyo Pop, I did a what was supposed to be a 3-part Dark Crystal set.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Halfway through number 2, they lost the license.
No.
So I had to stop with half of number 2 done. I had to stop and rehash and figure out how to make an ending out of all that, for reasons that are beyond their control. It's kind of sad because I've done so much work that's out of print for licensing reasons, and it makes me sad because I can't, point anybody at a new copy. But then there's things that were out of print that miraculously come back 20 years later, like the Elseworld's Finest, or Elseworlds as they called it, the Elseworld's Finest Supergirl and Batgirl story that sold out on its first day of issue because, of course, it had girl in the title, so everybody under ordered it. And then the initial orders weren't enough to justify a second printing, so it went mysteriously out of print for 20 years and then showed up in an anthology. But there was always there was a period of preconceived notions, shall we say, where things with girl involved in them would never sell because people had already decided they weren't going to sell, so they never had a chance.
Yeah.
And the frustration becomes, if we look at things just based on male-female creators, the body of work done by male creators is this deep. The body of work done by female creators is this weak, but comparison happens across the top. So the cream of one side is compared to the entirety of the other. And you could take any 2 groups, and that's often the same. So then funding doesn't want to go to do anything good with those particular adjectives attached because it doesn't sell as much as this side. You go, well, it kind of could if it had the same, or as I usually say to people right now, if they say girl comics don't sell, I say Raina Tegelmeier. You want to compare sales figures? You'd like hers.
Yeah. Well, do you find as someone who sort of, and not to make your whole career about trying to find some equality when it comes to the writing, when it comes to the genders, but do you find in the modern day when there's all this uproar about stupid stuff about not I guess uproar is not a fair phrase, that kind of makes it sound like it's way bigger than it actually is. It's probably just a few loud voices online, but when the movies come out and people, obviously it seems like there's a real immediate dislike of the properties that do follow women amongst certain groups of people that are very vocal online or in certain websites and stuff. Do you still follow a lot of that and find frustration in that, or are you kind of
I ignore a lot of that stuff online, except because that comes out of, we're back to the idea of the dopamine. When people want what they want, and if they want it to serve them, no matter who they are, and it isn't, then it's frustrating and wrong. And all I say is I'd like to see there's opportunities for male characters. It's not about it's about the characters. It's not necessarily about the creators. There's situations where the predominant paradigm is that the lead male is driving the car, shall we say, that they are the through point of the story. I'd like to see there be as many effective stories that have a female protagonist driving the car, shall we say. That makes a lot of people very socially uncomfortable for reasons they can or cannot identify or recognize. So if that female is the through line, then it's wrong. See also the people who didn't understand who the protagonist of the Black Panther movie was. That they've chosen another character in there to identify with and are seeing it as the movie about them. Mm-hmm. Or any story with multiple characters where you can see somebody else as the protagonist. Like I never watched Game of Thrones the first time around. I've been watching it now and asking people, who's it about? Because you could make a case for like half a dozen different characters and you sort of selectively watch and all that. So when you have something where, okay, if you have something like the Marvels, the girls are not dressed in skin tight, sexy suits. They're dressed in practical suits. At the same time, you have the Barbie fantasy ball gown of my superhero dreams. You know, oh my gosh, we get the princess dress, etc. You have a story that I thought was pretty good. I thought it had, I don't think it was an A++ story, etc. But you have a bunch of people who are joining together as a tribe to dislike it because that gives them their identity and their power. You know, if you come together with a group, if this thing is wrong because it's not serving your personal needs in terms of protagonists, if it's not serving your sexy voyeur needs in terms of costuming and things like that, then it is wrong. And if that's the experience they want out of it, it is wrong. I'd rather see them take that energy and then spend more time enjoying the things they like. Yeah. It seems cruel and rude to have to tear it down, you know, because there's another audience out there, your sisters, your wives, your parents who might want to see something more along that line. I'd like to see them share and let that thrive too. But I can understand when something's not your flavor, being upset that you wanted something to serve you and it's not, you know, here's a new thing of the kind of things I liked and it's not my flavor, so I'm disappointed. But there is doesn't matter who the crowd is or what the issue is. We have the whole social media paradigm of people flocking together with outrage. And we have algorithms that display and push outrage because it's a very strong, powerful emotion. Whereas if people could help be taught to just ignore the stuff you don't like, they'd be a whole lot happier with the things they did like.
Yeah. That's my biggest thing is I always say that you know, I jokingly reference it to like the female Ghostbusters movie when all these people got upset about it. I was like, go watch the other two. You know, like it's not like Melissa McCarthy's gonna come to your house and kick you in the balls and take your copy of Ghostbusters 1 and 2 away and leave you hers and that's all you have from now on. You know, go watch the one you love. Just if it's not for you, leave it alone. Just don't go to it.
But there's that personal disappointment. You have somebody who's liked the first and liked the second.
They want another one,
and then there's one that's not for them. So there's that expectation that you know, frustration that, oh, the resources that were spent on this should have been spent on something for me. See also the argument when somebody gets a water park versus a children's park versus a sports park. Two of those three people didn't get the version they wanted, so it's wrong. And there's anger because those resources, finite resources of space, money, or time, are spent on the thing they didn't want as opposed to the thing they did. When that happens, we're all 3-year-olds. We want our cookie, damn it, you know, and then ideally we don't need to dump that on others. But it's so human, and it's just not necessarily the best part of human.
Yeah, you summed it up really well. It's interesting talking to someone else about these sort of subjects because sometimes you frame it in a way that's like, well, you're kinder than I often am when I think about these people and some of the ire they bring and some of the because a lot of it, you're right, it comes from a very childish place, but it's also like it goes to anger and then like vitriol real fast sometimes, and just some people go like above and beyond the I just don't like this to the this is absolute garbage, and if you like it, you're a horrible person and a, you know, piece of shit or whatever, and it goes off from there. So
well, exactly what you're saying, I believe very strongly in, whenever possible, dealing with people with kindness. And I'll tell you, every one of those people who's all bent out of shape and upset and afraid, if you took any one of them and said, I need you to be the hero, I need you to watch out for this group of people, and I need you to make sure they have something for them, you have reframed the other into something that adds to their personal self in a way. It's kind of like the trick where teachers take bullies in school and tell them they need to be the hero protector of the weaker people. Boom, you've reframed that person because they already know they're being selfish on some level. If you point out and say you're being selfish, you just double down on that feeling because nobody wants to be bad. But if you can pull them inside and say, would you please share and be in charge of sharing? You can change the world. But we so often, and man, I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I'm no saint here. I've got a trigger horrible temper that will tear your throat out.
Yeah.
But I try to willingly push myself into the kindness side. I exceed probably 15% of the time. But if we all, if more people made a concerted effort to draw out, it's when you attack someone for their prejudices, when you attack them for something they've done that's selfish or cruel or rude or something like that, you just magnify that feeling in them.
Mm-hmm.
If instead you say, okay, you feel that way. It's okay that you feel that way, but could you ... Then you can kind of pull them towards something else.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love that. No, that's framed really well. I wish more people took that attitude, and maybe even some of our people in higher office could think of some of those things and make things a little better. Well,
Boy, no comment there.
Yeah, no worries. No. I mean, that's your problem, not mine. We have our own political issues over here. No, I really appreciate the chat. This is awesome, Barbara. I loved talking about your editor stuff and how putting people where their strengths are, because you're talking about your work with Kelly, who I'm a big fan of. I mean, I have one of his artist editions. I think it might have been his work on the regular Batman book, which is one of my cherished ones. I just love looking at it because it's got like the inks on it too, so it's like really, really cool. But it immediately made me think of, I recently watched that Hellboy documentary about Mike Mignola that came out. They kickstarted it.
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, it's awesome. I highly suggest it.
Mm-hmm.
He seems like such an interesting guy, kind of prickly, but interesting in that way as well. But they show a lot of him trying to make his way in comics, and how his big sort of awakening was when he did that one Batman issue, took place in a graveyard. It was all very gothic and dark, and he got to play with that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then that sort of opened the door to Hellboy and all the stuff he's created. It really shows that with the right person at the helm that kind of steers you, or at least encourages you to play to your strengths, you can really find that perfect thing that that you were meant to make. And
there's two things I did on Hellboy that I thought were really very helpful. Number one is when Mike started working on that. Okay, we're pushing everything forward.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed he's writing in marginalia on all the stories. And I called him and I said, Mike, you're having John Byrne write this, but you're writing it first. You're using him as a crutch. I think you ought to write this alone in your own voice, and I'll help you if you feel like you can't do that. But you're already showing me that you're doing it. So I think you should take this on alone, for which I'm sure John doesn't thank me. But again, it was that idea of pulling out the strongest in what people are doing. So that was number one. And number two was when I left Dark Horse, they were going to put this on the desk of an editor that I didn't think would be a good combination with Mike. So I said, obviously this kid's story has not turned out best since then. But I said, hey, there's this new assistant editor that you should talk to because he has the right feel in what he's interested in that I think would sync really well with your book. So, please, I can't get management to change the assignment they tell me they've made for the editorial on this. But if you talk to this person, I think you'd be better off with this Scott Alley kid. So, so I think both those two things help that series thrive. But at the core of it, it is Mike's quirky imagination and his love of monsters that brought all that together.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
there's other people I had to do a whole lot more editorial heavy lifting on. That one was mostly just, opening packages and giving encouragement.
Well, I don't know. I still always believe that some people downplay their involvement, but there's some weird magical synergy by the right people being in the right place that, every little part needs to be there for it to come together. So I'd ask you what's next, but you've already kind of told me, and we know what we know. So I'm very excited to see what that is. I'll definitely be keeping an eye for that. And yeah, thank you so much for giving me your time. Oh, go ahead.
And also on a local level, Mad Cave is doing an anthology that's a fundraiser for the fire relief efforts out here. So when that comes around, please point people towards it.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% will. Perfect. Well, thank you, Barbara, for your
I
time.
think the
This is
title is
excellent.
LA Strong. I'm not sure, but Mad Cave.
All right,
So,
Matt gave Ellie Strong. All right, I'll keep an eye out for it and definitely share it with the listeners. But yeah,
great.
thanks, Barbara. This is a blast. I had a really, really good time talking with
Thank
you.
you.
All right, have a great day.
Alrighty.
Bye bye.
You too. Bye.
And there it is, my conversation with Barbara Randall Kesel. What a great chat. Big thanks to her for being on the show. And as I said, sometimes you run into people that have differing opinions than you, and sure, it's easy to dismiss them. But as Barbara says, approach it with kindness, and you might be surprised about the outcome. So I really appreciate her bringing that to our conversation and helping me to reframe that, maybe not get so angry, I guess. I mean, I don't consider myself an angry person, but sometimes when you see things that you just are so conflicting to you, like conflict so much with your personal you know values, that you're very quick to dismiss the people that say them. But sometimes maybe talking, opening it up a little bit, showing a little kindness can go a long way, and maybe you can reach some kind of common ground. So it's a good lesson that all of us should learn in their day-to-day lives. So thanks, Barbara, for introducing that to me, and thanks to you for tuning in. So be sure to tune in next week for another excellent show. Stay tuned on the socials for who that will be. In the meantime, stay safe, have fun, go read some comics, and go read some comics by Barbara Randall Kesel. It's pretty cool stuff out there. It's amazing work. What a great body of work. And my cat just jumped on the table, so say goodbye, Lebowski. No, he's being quiet. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.